Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. My name is Syra Draper, and I'm the state representative for House District 90 in Atlanta and DeKalb County. We are here today to address the systemic attacks and dismantling of public health by our own government. I, along with the other elected officials you will hear from today, represent areas near and where the CDC is located. We have many constituents who are directly impacted by what has been happening at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And yes, we are fighting for those constituents, but do not be confused, because this is not just a DeKalb County issue, this is not just an Atlanta issue, this is not just a federal worker issue. The work of the CDC impacts every Georgian, every American, and indeed it has worldwide implications, because such is the work of public health. Many people may not realize what public health is, because when it is working, you do not see it. You do not notice the listeria outbreak that was stopped before the cold cuts left the processing facility. You do not see the influenza or avian flu event that was prevented because of good vaccination policies. And Ebola seems like a far-off disease because CDC workers put themselves in harm's way to stop the spread before it reaches our borders. Where doctors in an office or hospital are focused on the care of the single patient, public health officials work to improve health of entire populations. And so when you mess with the CDC, you mess with all of us. We just left an eye-opening roundtable discussion with a number of former CDC employees. It really laid bare the attack that these public servants have been under, from the erasure of data to the dismantling of effective health programs to dodging literal bullets. The folks at the CDC have endured the unthinkable. And why? Why do they put up with it? Because they are deeply committed to the mission of saving lives. Many of these people have worked for decades in the sector, across many presidential administrations, never allowing politics to interfere, always looking to the science to guide the policy. So let me give you an overview of what you will be hearing today. First, you will hear from Representative Omari Crawford, who will kick us off with a very important tribute. Next, you will hear from Dr. Deb Howery and Dr. Dan Jernigan, who resigned from the CDC last week after the controversial ouster of CDC Director Maneras. Then you will hear from Senator Elena Parent on the impact of the administration's rhetoric on public health. Next, you will hear from Representative Mary Margaret Oliver, who will speak on the shooting at the CDC and the legislature's refusal to pass meaningful gun safety legislation. And finally, you will hear from Rep. Imani Barnes from her perspective as a scientist. I will close us out with a call for support from our state leaders and open up the floors to questions from the press. So without any further ado, Representative Omari Crawford.
Good afternoon. I'm Omari Crawford, the state rep out of Georgia's 89th House District, home to the Centers for Disease and Prevention, better known as the CDC, our nation's leading public health agency and one of the most important agencies in our world. Before we begin this critical conversation, I think it's very appropriate and necessary that we take a minute to acknowledge the legacy of a DeKalb County officer who tragically lost his life on August 8th. Officer David Rose ran towards danger on that day after he heard reports of gunfire near the CDC. And in the line of duty, he made the ultimate sacrifice to protect others. He lived by the principles that he spoke about at his police academy graduation, and that is protecting the vulnerable, standing for justice, and running towards danger when others may run away. After that tragic incident, the legislators that you see here today knew that we had to respond. It was not a matter of if, but it was a matter of when. Because as my friend, Representative Draper says, that when an event like this happens, it not only impacts the people in the community, but it impacts everyone globally. And so I ask that we take a moment of silence to honor Officer Rose who was an American hero. If you would, please take a moment of silence. Officer Rose died protecting another group of heroes, some of them that you see standing with me. These men and women work tirelessly around the clock to ensure that we are safe. Our public health care workers make sure that we are protected from diseases and illnesses, and they make it their life mission to ensure our safety. And while their tools of danger may be different from those in law enforcement, make no mistake about it, that CDC employees also risk their lives on a daily basis to make sure that we are safe. And it is important that we stand up with them. In today's climate of misinformation, conspiracy theories, and politically motivated rhetoric, our CDC heroes are under attack. Let me be clear that the baseless vilification of CDC professionals is dangerous, and it undermines not only their health, but it compromises our nation's ability to respond to each and every health crisis that may occur. Words have consequences. Let me repeat that. Words have consequences. And the recent violent incident at the CDC was not an isolated act. It was a direct result of inflammatory, irresponsible language from some of our own leaders. This cannot continue. And if those leaders will not speak up in defense of science, data, and public health, then we will. The continued support of the CDC is not optional, it is essential. Without the CDC, programs that serve millions of Americans, especially those in rural areas, those with disabilities, and low-income families, are put at risk. And the ripple effect of weakening the CDC, or their attempt at weakening the CDC, is massive as it impacts every corner of our country. Each hero working in public health puts themselves on the front line every day, and we're very grateful for you. You all face threats and expose yourselves to dangers that many lay people cannot even imagine. We just had a very critical conversation in listening to what CDC employees do on a daily basis. It's not only heroic, it's honorable, and we need to protect you. You all have the education, the training, and the experience that we depend upon, and so we have to trust your work, and we must protect you so that you can do your work without fear or harassment. We should never tolerate the harassment of our heroes, and we never would. In any other industry, our heroes would never be the victim of abuse. In any other industry, heroes would never be villainized the way that our public health workers are, and so we cannot tolerate it here. Our public health professionals need our help, and the voices of some of those who support you, like us standing here, needs to be louder than the ill-advised, the ill-informed, the inexperienced, and untrained people who are saying things that do not match facts. I am going to stand amongst you, and I thank you for all of the work that you do. Thank you for your courage, thank you for your sacrifice, and thank you for your service to your communities and to our globe. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Deb Howery, and as of a couple weeks ago, I wouldn't have thought I would be here today. And so I don't have prepared remarks, but a few things I just wanted to share. First, I've worked across several administrations and was actually asked to be the transition lead for CDC because of my work across administrations. What this means is that I was welcoming the Trump administration and Secretary Kennedy to really see how we could help our priorities at CDC and those of the department align. Under the prior Trump administration, we advanced things like vaccines and overdoses. So I was optimistic. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist. I worked here at Grady. I care about saving lives, as do all the people behind me that are former CDC people. When I look at how right now decisions about vaccines are being made based on opinion and not data or science, that concerns me. When I see how our non-communicable diseases like chronic disease and the work we've done on overdose are being defunded and moved, I'm worried we're not going to be prepared for those health threats as well. And when I think about the substantial talent that is being lost, the brain drain right here in Atlanta and to our state, and the funding that is being lost to our state and local health departments and communities, I'm concerned. I love CDC. I love the work that I was doing, but being asked to take documents down that were scientific, I could not do. And after seeing the politicization of work that shouldn't be politicized, it's about saving lives and making a difference, myself and several of my colleagues knew that enough was enough, and together our voices were stronger. So we were happy to talk with y'all afterwards, but know that CDC is in our blood. You all matter to us, and we are here because now is the time to look at how we can work together, work as Republicans and Democrats, to make a difference in our community right here in Atlanta and Georgia. Thank you.
Thanks very much. My name is Dan Jernigan. I'm the former director of the National Center for Emerging and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases at CDC. I've been at CDC for 31 years. I've worked for part of that time with CDC at the Washington State Health Department. I've been working through multiple different agencies through many years, different presidents, Republicans, Democrats, and have been able to get the work of public health done throughout all of that time. But we find ourselves now with a difficulty in doing that because of the current secretary. We know that the agency, as we've been hearing, is under attack. I was actually in one of the buildings when the bullets started flying, one of the buildings where the bullets hit. We were on the phone with folks in other parts of the CDC who were telling us that the building is shaking. What's going on? We were able to see the fire department pull out from the fire station right next to CDC, trying to get people to turn around so that they didn't drive into the firing of that shooter. That was a physical attack, and we mourn for Officer Rose and the work that he did to help protect us. But that physical attack, I did not get physically attacked, but the agency itself has been attacked with rhetoric and with the kinds of information that's being put out there that really does not lead us to better public health. In public health, over 31 years, we realize CDC is not perfect. It is continually being revised. It is continually asking questions about how to do things better, trying to address whether or not the status quo needs to be changed. It can do that. It changes all the time. It can look to innovations. Right now, however, I found I was in a situation where I could not stay any longer because the current secretary and the immediate office of the secretary were not following the existing executive order on transparency and gold standard science. We need to make sure that when they say we need to be transparent, that we understand how the studies are being done that will be released in the next couple of weeks. When they say gold standard science, do we know that they are following objective approaches to looking at the data and coming up with the answers regardless of what you want them to show? And then finally, when Dr. Menorahs was released from her job, it really indicated that her ability to use science as the driver for public health policy making and for her ability to have independence with the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, where vaccine decisions are made, both of those things looked like we would not be able to do that any longer. We would not have a director that could do that, and that was the final straw for me, for Dr. Howery and Dr. Daskalakis. So what's at risk right now? I think you could almost see this as death by 1,000 cuts. We're cutting staff, we're cutting resources, we're undercutting science, and that's leading to the undermining of trust. And so for us right now, we need to do everything we can to work with the current administration as we can, but also to get folks out there and ask that science be put first, ideology put second, and that we can get back to protecting Americans here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Drs. Howery and Jernigan. We respect your many, many years of service to all of us through your positions at the CDC and appreciate you being with us today, as well as everyone else who has worked at and cares about the Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention who are here with us today. My name is Senator Elena Parent, and I represent the 44th Senate District, which does include the headquarters of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. What happened on August 8th at the CDC was not just a tragedy, it was a wake-up call. The death of Officer David Rose and the terror inflicted upon CDC staff and all of the surrounding neighborhoods were the direct result of a climate that has grown increasingly hostile towards public health workers. According to multiple press reports, the shooter believed that the COVID vaccine had made him ill. He blamed the CDC and acted on that belief with deadly violence. But this wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of inflammatory rhetoric, misinformation, and political attacks on science itself. We have seen federal leaders delay their response, downplay the threat, and in some cases actively fuel it. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has repeatedly spread false claims about mRNA vaccines, even terminating contracts for their development just days before the shooting. His statements, since becoming secretary and for many years before it, have undermined trust in science and emboldened those who view public health professionals not as protectors, but as enemies. In the wake of the shooting, President Trump has not made any public remarks about the shooting or about the shooter's motivating beliefs. A striking omission from someone who claims to be tough on crime and supportive of law enforcement. This omission gives tacit approval to the shooter's views. Make no mistake. We cannot build vaccine policy on suspicion, misinformation, or politics, as this administration is clearly doing. Our policies must be grounded in science, transparency, and the collective expertise of people who have dedicated their lives to public health. Staff at the CDC have voiced their frustration and fear. They've watched their budgets slashed, their expertise dismissed, and now their safety compromised. The shooter fired hundreds of rounds into 6 CDC buildings. That level of violence does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a culture that is being fueled by this administration directly, this president directly, where public servants are vilified and the truth is treated as optional. To all of those at the CDC who feel abandoned or ignored in this moment, we want you to know that we hear you, we see you, we appreciate you. And we, those of you who have been elected to this General Assembly, will use our voices to amplify your voices. We must name this for what it is: a systemic attack on public health. And we must respond not with silence, not with spin, but with solidarity for those employees who have dedicated their lives to saving ours, truth, and action. Because if we don't lift our voices to protect the people who protect us, we all pay the price. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm Mary Margaret Oliver, a state representative at House District 84, and in my long career in both the House and the Senate, I've represented the CDC community continuously. I live about 200 yards off the Emory campus. I have had an opportunity to work on gun violence prevention legislation in this building from both sides of the aisle, from the House and the Senate, and I want to give you just a very brief history of why gun violence prevention legislation is today the most partisan issue that I have dealt with in a long political career. That was not always true, and that's my real message this morning. We have in the past had obvious victories and progress with bipartisan gun violence prevention legislation that somehow today has come to a stop. I was the sponsor of legislation to ban assault weapons for several years. That bill was never allowed a hearing in this building. And the reason that I brought that legislation forward in the Georgia legislative role was, as you know, in 1994, in a bipartisan effort, Congress banned assault weapons. And based on a political compromise of that day, they banned them for 10 years, thinking they would revisit the issue in 2004. When 2004 came, there was no compromise. The partisanship around gun violence prevention had taken over and grown, and the assault weapon ban federally was walked away from. Here's the question I want you to ask. How many children would be alive today if the assault weapon ban had remained in effect legally? Think about the patterns of school violence, shootings, and murders, and what was the weapon used, and ask that question to your neighbors, to the folks that you go to the soccer games with, and to all of those of you and your families and communities that care about gun violence prevention. Earlier in my career, there was a legitimate bipartisan discussion, senators and House members, on a variety of issues. We weren't successful in passing a lot of that, but we did have civil and specific conversations about gun storage, about liability, and about opportunities in hearings where law enforcement would come forward and talk about the need for gun violence prevention. I call upon the Senate leader, Burt Jones, the House leader, Speaker John Burns, to reconvene a bipartisan hearing and discussion about bipartisan need for gun violence prevention. We are at a point where we know our constituents care about this issue, and we are at a point where an honest discussion is more needed now than it ever has been. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Representative Imani Barnes. I represent House District 86, which is in Tucker and actually encompasses some parts of Emory University. I proudly stand here as a scientist and with a career in public health and a doctoral candidate in public health. Public health and science is my passion, and I draft a lot of my policy using public health methods and data and science. Too often, public health is invisible until something goes wrong, as my colleague also said. Doctors and nurses, we understand what they do. They treat individuals, but public health protects populations, and that's something we can't physically, touch as doctors and nurses, but we know makes a difference. It's the reason we have safe drinking water. It's why smoking rates are down. It's the reason we have systems in place to trace outbreaks, deliver vaccines, and respond to hurricanes and reduce maternal mortality and mental health. Public health is the quiet shield that surrounds all of us when it's working, and most people never even notice it, again, as my colleague said. But when it breaks down, the consequences are devastating. So what happens without public health? We've already begun to see those consequences. Cuts to the CDC and the NIH just don't weaken the federal government. They destabilize local clinics and research centers and mental health clinics. Emergency response teams across Georgia become depleted. As was said earlier, about 80 cents of every dollar in CDC's domestic budget goes directly to state and local institutions. I happen to be an employee of one of the local institutions who was also affected by the shooting. As we're discussing CDC, the community, the other local institutions were also affected, who had to go to work the next day and be in that scared and silent environment after just having a terrorist attack on something that we also do. This funding supports disease prevention, emergency response, and other things that I've already stated. When it's slashed, the consequences are predictable. We know what happens when we don't have public health. More illnesses, more preventable deaths, and if we want to entice others who don't believe in this science, it eventually affects our economy. These are important services that impact real families living in the state of Georgia every single day. Right now, there's mRNA research that's leading to vaccine technology, and it's already saved millions of lives, and it has the potential to prevent cancer. But progress like that does not happen without sustained investment in our public health systems. You can't isolate public health from the rest of the society. It touches everything. It touches our school, it touches our jobs, it touches our justice system, our safety, our sense of safety. And let me remind you of something that we may all be aware of, public health achievements that have been in history. The eradication of smallpox. You know, we got measles coming back in Texas, and we're not very well educated because we can't be with the current administration. The eradication of smallpox was a CDC-led effort, and without that, can you imagine what our nation would be like? Can you imagine if the funds dried up then and politics overshadowed science then? To dismantle public health is to destabilize the very fabric of our society. It's not a privilege to have public health, it's a lifeline. We owe it to our communities, our researchers, our scientists, our responders, and we owe it to Officer David Rose, who fought for us in the event that we had a terrorist attack. Not just because it's a crisis, but we need to fight for public health every single day, and thank you for your time.
In February, I stood here on these steps with many of these same folks behind me, and it was in the thick of the DOGE cuts to the CDC. Thousands of jobs were being slashed indiscriminately without any seeming regard for the repercussions to public health. And at that time, we begged state leaders in Georgia to do something, to speak up for Georgians, to protect their work and their livelihoods, and to fight for the science that would keep us healthier and safer. And we were met with silence and with shrugged shoulders. On August 8th, Governor Kemp, rightly, praised Officer Rose for his heroism during the attack on the CDC campus. But he said nothing about the terror endured by CDC staff, the children and the caregivers at the on-site child care center, or the ripple of fear felt across nearby institutions. And that silence matters. Perhaps he is following the signals of President Trump, who also has said nothing publicly about the shooting of a federal agency. And while Secretary Kennedy acknowledged the shooting, his concern was seemingly short-lived because he forced out CDC Director Menares for saying the obvious, that anti-vaccine rhetoric contributed to the shooting. Public health in this country has never been more under threat. So we, again, call on Governor Kemp to take action, not only on behalf of his constituents whose livelihoods are threatened, but on behalf of all Georgians whose health is at stake. Governor Kemp, we are calling on you to publicly support the CDC, not just as a federal agency, but as a cornerstone of Georgia's identity and global leadership. Express empathy for the staff who have been terrorized, dismissed, and demoralized. Stand with the scientists, the epidemiologists, the data analysts, and the community of health workers who have dedicated their lives to protecting ours. Another recommendation we have is that you protect Georgians by establishing state-based public health strategies. For example, since decisions about vaccine access are now being politicized, Georgia can develop a state-based vaccine access strategy, purchasing vaccines directly and authorizing state-run clinics to offer off-label vaccinations under physician guidance. This would ensure access for vulnerable populations, especially those excluded by politicized federal guidelines. Governor Kemp, we call on you to build or join multi-state coalitions to defend science and share resources, partnering with other states to issue joint statements, coordinate legal strategies, and amplify evidence-based public health messaging. And finally, we ask you, Governor Kemp, to reaffirm a commitment to transparency and public trust, communicating clearly and consistently about public health interventions grounded in science, not politics. And I'll say one more thing. There have been many campaigns launched for statewide office in the last few months. If you are a candidate running for statewide office in 2026 and you are not fighting for the CDC, and by direct extension, the public health, you have no business being entrusted with a position of leadership. Stand up, speak out today. Public health is not just about responding to crisis. It is about preventing them. It is about surveillance, science, and service, measuring threats, understanding their causes, and implementing interventions that protect entire populations. And when it works, it saves lives quietly, efficiently, and cost-effectively. We cannot afford to lose this capacity. We cannot afford to lose the CDC, and we cannot afford to lose the moral clarity that comes from standing up for science, for safety, and for the people of Georgia. If there's any questions from the press, we will take them at this time. Look, that's a great question because over and over again we have said that this is not a political issue. It shouldn't be a political issue. But I'll refer you back to February when we held a press conference during the legislative session. And while there were a lot of people here in the audience, probably both Democrats and Republicans, none of my Republican colleagues on the other side of the aisle were here. And so unfortunately, I think people take a lot of their direction from the top. And the Trump administration has politicized what shouldn't be a political issue. And look, the reality is, if you're a politician in Georgia, it is scary to go up against Trump, right? There are repercussions for people who go up against Trump. And so people might be weighing the consequences of standing up and doing what's right. But here's the thing, with this issue, it's black and white. We are either protecting the people of Georgia or we're forwarding our political ambitions. And if that's what my colleagues are doing, they're making the wrong choice and shouldn't be in leadership.
So there's a lady in the audience here who talks about her neighbor who died after of a brain bleed after he had a COVID vaccine. And so her question is, why are those concerns being dismissed? I hear you talk about the science. What is
Yeah, and first I want to say I'm sorry for the loss of your friend. We did, and we took notes. And what I would say, okay, so I appreciate that, happy to have a discussion later, but Dan and I are going to just try to answer your question. And what I would say is, ma'am, I listened to you. I hope you'll listen to me. And what I would just say is we have a vaccine safety review that we do. Can I finish? And what I would just say is we look at every death. We do have investigations that happen. And when we saw that there were issues, like even recently with the chikungunya virus vaccine, we quickly acted and worked with FDA to change it. Dan, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple different vaccine systems that we use to monitor safety at CDC. And those systems have been in place for a while. Many of that data is actually public data. So happy to follow up with you on how better we can do or how better CDC can do to make that more available to folks. Thanks.
Thanks.
We have another question.
So why was the CDC sued? Why was the CDC?
We're gonna let them ask more questions.
Look, when it comes to outsider points of view, I don't think that's the issue. But the science is the science, whether you believe in it or not. And the science is truth, whether you believe in it or not. So to the extent...
So what I will just say is, as the transition lead and the chief medical officer, I did read RFK Jr.'s books. I was also willing to brief him on measles, vaccines, H5N1, but I never did. I was never asked. Thank you.
Next question.
I think we're already feeling it. When we've had over 2,000 people impacted by a reduction in force, that impacts our labor, our spending, and economic development in this city. Certainly, I think we're going to see even more of a ripple effect as budget cuts impact the state and local health departments. I think that's when we'll see it even broader across Georgia. But we're feeling it now. The people behind me, many of them lost their jobs. So we're already feeling this. And I think that's what's important, is understanding the people here are trying to save lives. They dedicated themselves to this. They are career public servants.
Yeah, I think CDC isn't alone in public health. Most public health is done at the state public health departments and at local health departments, and much of that is supported with federal funds. Upwards of 90% of communicable disease departments in state health departments are funded with federal funds. And so as there are cuts to CDC, there will be cuts then to the state health department, and then services like monitoring foodborne illness, vector control, things like that that you may not even know is happening around you. You'll start to see that that's not happening in the increase in cases of disease that are associated with that.
And over 50% of the budget comes from pharmaceuticals.
Okay, next question.
Can you repeat the question? We couldn't hear. Do you mean with the department or with the community? By HHS, I say, because at CDC we deployed people to Texas, worked very closely with the state health department, who was a wonderful partner. Same thing with many of the surrounding states. We did provide vaccines and other therapeutics, as well as on-the-ground technical assistance. Myself and the measles team were not asked to brief the secretary. We did offer.
And no one asked for updates from CDC?
We were asked for updates, and we provide data regularly on measles, and we publish it on our website too. It's very open and transparent to the public, both on vaccinated, unvaccinated cases, and where it spreads across the nation. The vast majority of cases come from outside the U.S., but then are spread among populations that are not vaccinated. Yeah, so the new director is an acting director, so my hope is that the president does determine a new, permanent director, because what is really needed is permanent scientific leadership. The deputy secretary, who's the acting director, has an operations background, and so that's important, but he needs a strong scientific and medical bench around him, and that is currently lacking given many of the departures. Dr. Menares was the first non-physician, but she was a PhD scientist. This would be the first non-physician or non-scientist to be leading an agency, and I do think it's important when that new bug or pathogen happens, or when there's an outbreak, to know what to do on spur of the moment when you do get that call from the White House.
Yeah, I mean, CDC has a long history of looking at the science, methodically going through it, identifying where the biases are, and then coming up with recommendations that are science-driven. The staff will continue to do that. At this point, there's a lot that still is up on the website that you can trust. My concern is that anything coming out after a couple of weeks from now, that if it is placed on the CDC website with regard to vaccine safety, I'm not so sure if we can trust that information. My request to the Secretary is to get back to science-driven development of policy, looking at the data. We can do that. We can look at all sides of information and come up with the best path forward, and we would ask that he would do that, just as we've done in the past. Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot of uncertainty out there right now, and that's leading to people having indecision. So they're not choosing to get vaccinated, whereby it would have been very simple for them to do that previously. I'm concerned about that because I think without those vaccines, people will be getting respiratory illnesses, especially those that are at higher risk. So we want people to take those vaccines. We hope that they will be available. I was referring to some statements that the Secretary has made about revelations of new scientific findings that will come out in the next couple of weeks. I think that was some of the comments I made previously about transparency and gold standard science. It's not that I know that something is coming out. I don't know what's coming out.
Is that at all? Like the scientists, right? They can make the data.
They can, but most scientists will usually have a protocol. They'll publish that protocol. You'll know exactly how they're doing their analysis. They'll provide data that you can then reanalyze. I'm not sure what will happen here.
So is this unusual?
This is not the way that we do science at CDC.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to stop this now, but thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate your attention to this matter.
Good job.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. My brain turned off because I was.